In this video, we're going to show you how to download, install, and configure SQL Server for use with Calxa. The steps outlined in this video are provided as general advice only, and you should refer to Microsoft documentation for your particular needs. We're going to use SQL Server 2012 Express, which is a free version. However, paid, standard, or enterprise versions are all fine to use with Calxa. And at the time of this recording, Calxa supports Server 2005, 2008, and 2012. So first of all, we need to download the SQL Server installer. You can search for Download SQL Server Express 2012 or anything similar and download from the Microsoft website. Once you get to the download page, there are generally a number of options to choose from. You'll need to know whether your operating system is 64-bit or 32-bit, as they are separate installers. Most operating systems these days are 64-bit, and this is the one that I'm choosing. Also note, I've chosen the option that ends with WT, which means with tools. These tools will make the configuration later a bit easier. And if your operating system is 32-bit, then you'll need to use the x86 version shown here. So let's proceed with the install and run the downloaded file. I'll be fast forwarding the slow bits throughout this video, so if you're following along, you might need to pause from time to time. Okay, so all the files have now extracted and we have the SQL Server Installation Center. We're going to choose New SQL Server Standalone Installation. You'll need to accept license terms, and it's up to you if you want to send usage data to Microsoft. And the installer will now prepare the setup files. The setup support rules identify problems that might occur when you install SQL Server, so all going well, you won't receive any failures. On the feature selection page, generally the default options are okay, but I do recommend you make sure the management tools are being installed, as this is what we'll use later to configure users. The installation rules are checked and the installer will progress to the instance configuration. We are now going to use a named instance and call it Calxa. Next we come to the server configuration. Now I'm just going to use the default settings here, but you can use specific user accounts to run the SQL Server services. Additionally, you can set the browser service to automatic. The browser service aids when browsing defined SQL Server instances on your network. And we will turn this on later, but I'm going to show you how to do that using the SQL Configuration Manager. This way you'll know where the settings are if you ever need to troubleshoot or reconfigure something. For the server configuration, I'm going to use the mixed authentication mode. Windows authentication is fine, and it's what we recommend in terms of authenticating Calxa users in a domain environment. However, with mixed mode, you can specify an SA, or SQL Server Administrator account and password. This is very handy if the Windows user who installed the server leaves your organization, or for whatever reason you lose admin access to the server. Also, if you're working in a non-domain environment, I find it easier to work with SQL users. So with mixed mode selected, you'll just need to set and confirm an SA password. You can also specify additional Windows users to be SQL Server administrators, but the user installing the server will be added by default. We'll use the defaults on other tabs and click Next to continue. I'll let you decide if you want to send error reports to Microsoft. Click Next and the installation process will begin. This can take a few minutes to process, so I'll catch you on the other side. Hopefully you now have a screen that looks like this one that's full of green ticks, as the installation is now complete without errors. So in this next part of the video, we're going to configure our installed server for remote access. So we need to launch the SQL Server Configuration Manager. In the Configuration Manager under Network Configuration, you will find protocols for all the installed instances. Select the appropriate instance, and then we want to enable TCP/IP protocol. You could also enable the name pipes protocol, but in this video we're going to connect using TCP/IP. Once we've edited the network configuration, we'll need to make two changes to the SQL Server services. We'll set the browser service to start automatically. If you did this in the installation process, it will already be set to automatic, but otherwise you need to right-click and select Properties, the Service tab, and then set the start mode to automatic. Click OK to apply the changes, and then we need to restart the SQL Server service to make sure all the changes are applied. You will note the instance name in brackets, so you should make sure to select the correct instance if you have multiple. Right click and select Restart. That's it for the SQL Server configuration. Now we want to create the Calxa database. This is an important step because it's a common mistake that people will go ahead and create a database using SQL Server tools, but this is not the case. You need to use Calxa to create your database, and this way it's created with all the correct settings and structure. So at this point, we're going to open Calxa. I recommend running Calxa as the Windows user who configured the SQL Server. This is because we haven't configured any other users yet. And if you run Calxa as another user, you may get connection problems to the SQL Server. We will cover creating SQL users later, but it's easier to configure permissions if the database already exists. Hence, we're doing the create database steps first. If you've already used Calxa before, you may find it opens an existing database. If that is the case, you'll just need to open the Calxa menu in the upper left corner and select Authentication to get to the Open or Create Calxa database screen. If you don't already have a Calxa database, then you'll come straight to this screen. Now we don't want to create a local database, so we will select Network Database on the left-hand side. If you know your SQL Server name, you can type it directly. However, I'm going to use this drop-down menu, which will browse all available SQL servers on your network. Note, for the browse functionality to work, you must have configured protocols and the browser service outlined earlier. Since we're trying to create a new database, you just need to type the name you would like the database to be called. Click Sign In, and since the database doesn't exist, it will ask you if you would like to create it. Click Yes. And now the database is created, I'm just going to pause here for a moment because I want to quickly explain that if you had connection errors at this point, you should revisit the previous steps about configuring for network access, and also ensure that there is no firewall blocking the communication. I generally like to temporarily turn off the firewall to test if this is causing problems, but sometimes this isn't always possible. So for more details on this, please refer to our support note titled Troubleshooting SQL Server Connection Errors. This covers all the troubleshooting steps you should require to resolve any connection errors. Okay, so back to the video. So because we've just created a new database, it is empty and we need to create our organization. If this is a new Calxa setup, you will use the Create New From button to link to your accounting system. Just choose the appropriate one from here. However, if you have some existing data in another Calxa database, perhaps a local database that you're upgrading to a network database, you'll want to use this option to copy the organization from it. You can check the Step 1 support notes or videos in the Getting Started series on how to create new organizations. So I'm going to demonstrate the Copy From feature in this video to copy an organization from a local database into my network database. It is a wizard approach, so you can copy from any other data source, but we're going to use the local data file option here, and we just need to browse and find the database that we want to copy from, then click Open. If your database has a password, you'll need to provide it here, then click Next. You will now get a list of all the organizations that are in the database you selected. You'll need to repeat this Copy From process multiple times if you need to copy all the organizations. So simply select the one you require and click Finish. You'll see the organization has now been copied from the local database into the network database that you're currently connected to. Next up, we need to configure any users who will need to access the SQL Server and the Calxa database. Here, we need to use the SQL Server Management Studio. Authenticate with the appropriate server, and then you can configure new logins. Expand security, right-click on logins and select New Login. As I said in the beginning, I'm going to use Windows users, but you can configure SQL logins if required. I'm also going to use a domain group so that we only need to manage the Calxa user permissions in one place, and new users can just be added to the domain group rather than needing to manage them in SQL Management Studio. So first up, I'm adding groups into the object types to search, and then I'm changing the search scope to the entire directory. This way I can search for my domain group. Search and select the group you want to use, and then click OK and OK again. Now for the permissions on this user. Select server roles, and as a minimum each user must have public access to the server. If you want your users to be able to restore Calxa backups, they will also need DB Creator. Sysadmin would give full control of the SQL Server, but we're going to use the least privileged approach here. Now we'll switch to user mapping, which is where we can grant specific permissions to the Calxa database. Check the checkbox next to the Calxa database to map this user, and then in the database role membership, you should grant the DB owner role. This will provide full control of the Calxa database, which is recommended so users can take backups and perform all database operations, including database upgrades, if a Calxa update requires it. That's it. We have now installed SQL Server, created a Calxa database, and configured the users to connect to it. Each user should now be able to run Calxa, and via the Open or Create a Calxa database screen, browse and select the appropriate SQL Server, and also browse for the Calxa database, then sign in. If you've had any troubles with the steps throughout, please feel free to catch us on the details below. We'll be happy to assist with your configuration or troubleshooting any problems you may have encountered. Thanks for watching. Cheers.